Hey, Jim, we've got a new intro. Do you want to hear it?
Let's hear it.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. So if you're a beginner or an expert or anyone in between, you've found your new home. Welcome to Identity at the Center. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
So how about that?
That's fancy, dude. I like it.
Yeah, figured, you know what, for episode 200, we start off a little bit different. We got a new intro, spent a little time on it, spent a little money on it to put it together. But I'm pleased with the way it came out.
Yeah, and just, behind the curtains, how did you get it done? I don't
Fiverr.
recognize that voice.
Yeah, so I went on Fiverr and talked with a few different people and kind of explained what I'm looking for. Went through a few different revisions and settled on that. So Keith is my guy.
Yeah, and you know what I really like about it? Like, it's punchy. He has a very clear way of speaking, which I wish I did. He enunciates very clearly, and I think the length of the intro is appropriate, right? It's not like too long. It's not too short. Perfect.
Yeah, we don't want something that was like 4 minutes of introduction, and we went through a few different versions, but yeah, something I try to keep it. I've been trying to keep them under 30 seconds or so for the last couple of years, so you no longer have to listen to my crappy intros. Now we actually have a professional one. So
no, I mean, like, I love the new intro, but I want to say that the old intro was good too. I mean, I don't call it crappy. You did a great job with that.
Well, maybe I should go on Fiverr and start doing
little side hustle.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, welcome to the Identity Center podcast. I'm Jeff. That's Jim. Jim, how things going?
Good. So I had a really interesting afternoon and evening yesterday. So I was sitting on. I live in Augusta, Georgia, so I was sitting on Bobby Jones Expressway, which is kind of a major thoroughfare. It turns from like a limited access highway into a road with lights. And I get to the one light, and the police stop traffic, and they pull this thing across the road, which looks like a string, basically. I'm like, and then they wave everybody. So end up at the next light. Sitting there at the next light, this car, like a bat of heck, flies by and is being chased by like 20 police cars. And they go into a ditch. This car goes into a ditch, flies out of the ditch, makes a turn on like the smaller road, and all the police cars like chase after him. I'm like, wow, that's like something you would see on the nightly news. And I just saw it in person. And you know what I realized was I forgot to take out my phone and video this whole thing, because that's what you're supposed to do these days. It was.
How are we going to validate this even happened? This isn't just a story you made up.
So the only somewhat proof that I have is that later on in the evening, there was a report that a fugitive was on the loose in our area, that he ditched his car in one of the neighborhoods nearby and was like running around and supposedly armed. And which, I mean, I guess if you run away from the police and you ditch your car, you're probably armed. And I don't know actually if he's been caught yet.
But I was sure this guy sounds like he made a getaway or something. I don't know.
I can't believe.
So what was it, like tire spikes that they tried to pull out across the road? And
yeah, I'm not sure.
I mean, that's usually
like the whole time I thought they were maybe pulling something across. You know how they have those like counters on certain roads to try to see like how many people are driving on that road. At first I was thinking, well, I guess it's that, but it just looked like a piece of string. And then it's like police officers doing it, which I thought was strange. In the middle
why are these police officers pulling string across the road? That doesn't make any sense.
It didn't make sense. And none of it added up until I saw the guy. It was like a Mitsubishi Spider. It's the kind of vehicle I would say it was. It was gray, and like it went into this ditch hard. I mean, it had to be going like 40 miles an hour into this ditch. And then like all the police cars were swarming, but he just like kept driving and then like pulled off on this small road. And then I mean, with the number of police cars that were chasing after him, the idea that they didn't catch him is insane to me.
Yeah, that seems kind of weird.
Like, how
Any
many-
helicopters?
Yeah,
No
so,
aerial
yeah.
support?
So supposedly there's a helicopter circling around the area last night. So I guess there's a lot of crime in Augusta, a lot of shootings and stuff like that. I'm kind of sheltered where I live because it's like the more suburban area. But I never see things like that happen.
Yeah, that is weird and interesting. I guess.
Yeah,
not,
it's like
not,
you don't.
I guess not in a good way.
No,
But that seems to be par for the course, Jim. Is you're starting off all of our recent episodes on somewhat of a downer.
yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, it was kind of I don't usually have something that spikes my adrenaline and heart rate, other than going to the gym. So that was the plus side, and plus I didn't get hurt or killed. So
Yeah,
look, there's
you were
plenty to
just a
celebrate.
bystander, but you didn't have your phone, so there's no social
There's
media
no
footage
video.
of it. So
I could throw that on LinkedIn. That would be a big hit.
yeah, I'm sure. Well, no, please don't put it on LinkedIn. I hate when people put like
Personal
not work
stuff on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm with you.
It's like I get that.
I don't really hate it, but I mean, some people feel compelled to do it, and I haven't seen anybody who's like a serial personal life poster on LinkedIn.
Oh, I've seen a bunch. I guess
Have
maybe
you?
it just depends on the network or whatever it may be that you're part of. But
That's right.
yeah, there's things on there that I see all the time. And it's like, really, this is the place for that you want to put that?
How do you choose who to accept on LinkedIn and who not to?
That is a great question because I get a lot. Lots of listeners, which are great. So if I get a message with it that says, "Hey, I'm a listener" or whatever, that's a no-brainer, right? Of course, we're going to connect. I get a lot of no context invites as well. It's like, okay, who is this person? Why are they reaching out? Recruiters, other technology companies, things like that. So, okay, well, if they're in the IAM space, I might look at them and say, okay, sure. I get an awful lot of like podcast promotion people. I do not accept any of those. Like it has not, I'm not interested in that side of the world. But it seems like there must be like some sort of like class that gets out because I will receive like every 8 weeks, 12 weeks, like 10 of them all in the same day. And then I'll get like nothing for like a few weeks. And it seems to be like there's maybe some sort of like training course somewhere's doing to like help, people who want to help promote podcasts or marketing or whatever it may be. At least that's my theory. It just seems very interesting. It's very spiky, nothing, very spiky, nothing. And that's been a trend for like the last year and a half or so.
Yeah, I had an interesting one come up the other day where somebody connected to me. So, by the way, my attitude is I'll accept anybody, but if it becomes like an ongoing series of unwanted direct messages, I just block them.
Mm-hmm.
But this person reached out to me, connected, and they were from an identity and access management technology company, and not one that I'd heard of. But I said, all right, well, interested in learning more, whatever. But then I looked at the person's profile picture, and it was like one of those perfect profile pictures where it was like, man, I wish my profile picture was like that clear and that well framed and everything. But then I looked at it, I was like, it kind of looks like there's like something like over her chin. So I clicked into it further, and it was a watermark from like a stock photo site. And I'm like, no, that's total garbage, man.
Yeah,
like
clearly a fake
especially
profile.
for an IM technology product company to have somebody out there using a stock photo, and it was supposed to be like their VP of strategy or something. I was like, that is weak sauce, man.
I get the occasional fake profile where it's clearly not a real person. It's like, oh, here's this person's background. They start with like, I'm in identity, and then you look at that like their job history. And it's like, oh, I was a programmer, and then I was like chief marketing. And there's like the work history and all the details around it don't make any sense whatsoever. Everything conflicts with everything else. There's clearly no direction there, and it's just like a profile that was put together to harness as many keywords for searches as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's bad. That's bad.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if it's as bad as a watermark on your LinkedIn picture. That's pretty bad too.
yeah, I think like if I had gotten that and it was somebody who was like just trying to sell, hey, we'll promote your podcast or we're search engine optimization, then it would kind of go with it. But that they were actually like, hey, we've got the best IAM provisioning tool, et cetera, et cetera. That to me was like, no, you can't have a stock photo.
Yeah. Well, stock photo's bad regardless. I mean, it opens up so many questions. I mean, licensing,
Yeah.
all that stuff. I guess
Yeah.
all stuff that I think about, right, when we put out episodes is, okay, well, am I getting like a copyright strike on this? We can't use, commercial stuff. It's just the two of us. So it's not like, we have all this, protection from like a brand perspective. So I'm very careful about how our stuff gets out there so that we avoid any issues.
That's how you make it to episode 200, man. You can't just like roll out of bed and be on episode 200.
Yeah. Episode 200, man. This is a pretty big milestone for us. We were actually talking milestones before we hit record here. And I feel like every 100 episodes is a milestone. There's clearly bigger ones like 500, 1,000, if we ever make it to that, like that kind of thing. But I still feel like every 100 is still a pretty significant milestone, especially if you consider the vast majority of podcasts never make it past episode 7. And here we are in number 200.
Yeah, I think it's like a natural 200 because I like to say we've done an episode every Monday for the past 3.5 years. And it's not exactly true, right? Like over Christmas, we take a break. And then we've, certain conferences we'll go to, would do like 4 or 5 episodes while we're there. And, we're not going to stagger those out over the next 4 or 5 weeks. We do a burst of 3 to 5 episodes in a week. But what I mean by it's natural is like we're not taking an episode, a recording, and chopping it up into 3 parts. Typically, I'd say the most we've recorded was like 2 episodes in one day. I don't think we've ever recorded 3 in one day. So it's not like we're doing things to juice that number.
Yeah. 191 and a half weeks since the podcast started, which I think our first original recording was June 20th. And we're going to play some clips later of some of the shows that I think, you and I have liked over the last couple of years. I was debating on episode 1, and it's just so bad from an audio quality perspective that I couldn't bring myself to like make a clip out of it. If you want to go listen to it, great. I think the content is good, but I think we are clearly the first time we've ever done it. Didn't know what we were doing and still kind of figuring it out. And again, 200 episodes later, we're still kind of figuring it out as we go along. But I feel like we have gotten a little bit better at, certain aspects of things. But 191 and a half weeks, and we've put out 200 episodes. So we're averaging, just over 1 episode every week, which I think is pretty impressive, considering this isn't even our day job, right? This is something we do on the side for the love of the game. We're not sponsored. We don't run commercials, right? Occasionally we'll get support from the companies that we've worked with, over the last couple of years. But for the most part, when people hear and see the Identity Center podcast, it's you and me. You handle all the booking and sort of getting together, what the topics for the shows are going to be about. And I handle kind of all the back end stuff and web and editing and things like that.
Yeah. And, you and I met working at Identropy. We worked very closely together and it grew into a friendship. And we thought, hey, why don't we come up with a podcast? And honestly, I think of the 200 episodes, 199 going into today, I haven't listened to many of them. I'm there for the recording. I'm there for and I think you probably listened to all of them, but I've listened to hardly any of them. And I actually, the other day, listened to episode 199 with Sarah. And I was like, this isn't half bad. It's actually a pretty good podcast we put out.
Yeah, no, I think this is something that most people struggle with, is hearing their own voice. I certainly did. I mean, I was there. I don't necessarily need to listen to every episode, but I hear it naturally as part of, the editing process and trying to make things go well. But yeah, I think, I think we've done all right for, a 2-man show for the last couple of years. I'm looking forward to another, 200 episodes at least. Do you remember the first question you asked me when we first met at Identropy? I remember it very clearly because we were in Las Vegas.
No, I don't remember.
It's a very Jim question.
Do you like baseball?
Absolutely. That was the first question. And I was like, not really. I kind of follow the Cubs, but that's it. And then you just kind of like walked away.
I have no use for this guy.
Yeah, exactly. It was some dinner that we were doing, I think probably for like Dentropy customers or something like that. And that was the first time we had met face to face, I think. We'd been on the phone, a few times before that. But yeah, that was like our first introduction. And who would have thought, I guess that would have been 7 or 8 years ago now, here we are, still working together. Certainly the odd couple. I don't think we could be really any more different in a lot of different areas, but it certainly works. Our friend Jody calls us the identity mullet. I'm the business up front. You're the party in the back. But yeah, it's worked. And hey, man, cheers to us for 200 episodes.
Yeah. Jody's a great person. And I can remember working with her organization. And it was like one of those ones that proved that every different advisory you go into, you're going to see some things that are the same, but there's always something that's different. And actually, that one had a lot that was different because they didn't run Active Directory. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's almost like the first box you could check with every company on their internal IAM. They've got an Active Directory. And this
they ran Samba, right? I think it was
Samba.
That was my first introduction to like really getting into more detail on Samba. And it's still the only time I've seen Samba in any enterprise that I've worked with.
Yeah, I remember them telling us that they were like the biggest user of Samba.
So. Yeah, like they contribute to the open source, whatever it is. Like,
exactly.
Right, cool. So what's changed in the last couple of years? I mean, I feel like 200 episodes, there's been changes in presidents and health. What else?
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be hard to ignore the fact that we went through this big global pandemic. Trying to think, when did it start? Like March 2020, right?
Yeah. We were here before it and we're here after it because
we survived it, thank goodness. Yeah, both literally and figuratively. I mean, I think that's probably one of the biggest things that happened in our career. And it happened right in the middle of the life of the podcast. So here's one thing that I remember was we were growing our listenership like crazy. Like, I think in the beginning, like our first, let's call it 15, 20 episodes, it was like, it wasn't growing too fast. Then all of a sudden it was like, whoa, people must be listening to this podcast on their way to work. And then the global pandemic hit and it's like, oh, we're back to like where we were the first few episodes. Mm-hmm. Like people stopped listening, but then it's grown back and then some obviously since then. But I always wonder where people listen to the podcast. Like, what are they doing? Are they like mowing the lawn and listening to it? In their car,
putting their kid to sleep,
trying to get everyone to fall asleep. Yeah.
Most of the people I talk to, they are listening to it on commutes or walks or stuff like that they're kind of doing, that sort of thing. So I think, it's been an interesting climb. It's been a slow climb, but that's, I think, not somewhat by design, but as a result of, we don't really market, right? It's just, here's the content. If you like it, share it. If you don't, okay, but we share it anyway, right? Yeah. So set it out to an enemy. I don't care, right? And I think that's just kind of how it's grown. And, we've made a lot of great relationships in the industry. We've certainly, covered a lot of conferences and things like that. And I think people started to take notice about that. Obviously, Gartner's a big one, right? We were there sort of unofficially last year, and now we're going to be there officially, on the stage, interviewing Henrique and Becky in a couple weeks. And I think that's pretty amazing for not having, this marketing machine sort of behind it. It's just literally just two of us and the power of all our listeners really, tuning in every week. And that's super cool. And I'm super, grateful and thankful for all that stuff because that just, it's not lost to me every week that, there are thousands of people who, literally listen to us, all the time and all the great guests that we bring in. And people have been, I would say 99.9% supportive, and we get nothing but content or good feedback from folks, who reach out.
Yeah, you can't sell short the listeners sharing it, telling people to listen, and commenting on our post, because I mean, otherwise it really wouldn't go anywhere. We can't, we don't have a marketing budget, and even if we did, I don't think that's
We spent it all in the intro.
we spent it all on the intro. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So today's episode is really kind of like, I think, a little bit of a retrospective of kind of where we've been. I know that we're going to talk a few different clips here. I did want to bring up something that's relatively timely. So today is Sunday, February 19th. You and I were recording this in the morning as I've been traveling all week and just got back yesterday. And this is a topic that you and I were going to talk about anyway. And then I saw a post from Michael Freeman on LinkedIn wanting to know what our thoughts are on Twitter charging for SMS MFA. And I have some thoughts.
Do you want to go first, or do you want to hear my thoughts first?
Yeah, I'll go first because I think this is something I've been thinking about really all week since I heard the news. And I'm a little bit divided. And here's my thoughts. So, for those people who are not aware, Twitter is going to start disabling SMS as an MFA option for people who have not subscribed to Twitter's Blue service, which is essentially their monthly paid subscription, where you basically pay the month to get a couple extra features. One of those new features is going to be the continuing allowance to use SMS as an MFA. You can still use the Authenticator app, or there was another option, security key or something like that for MFA if you are a non-paying user. But the option for SMS will be removed sometime in the near future, is what it sounded like. I don't think that is a very pro-consumer change. Not in the least. I think the way that they're approaching this is essentially going to be, okay, you're not paying, we're just going to turn off MFA or second factor for you. And now you're just back to ID and password. That is terrible from a strategy perspective for protecting your customer accounts. And I think this is a money grab from Elon. I think he did not want to buy the company for $44 billion or whatever it was, tried to get out of it for months, essentially realized he had no case and had to buy it. And that investment has not paid off to date with a lot of things that have been happening, and he's doing everything he can to get more money out of things, to cut costs. And I think this is just a terrible move and doesn't make any sense from a security or from a user perspective. That's it. I mean, I purely think this is a money grab, and it's not thought out. Like a lot of things.
You said you were divided on it.
I am, because I think that's my, I guess, my negative opinion. The positive opinion is I think it's great to try to move people off of SMS or email MFA, because of course they are not the most secure things in the world. They are certainly the lowest, I would say, of the MFA options that are out there, but they are still better than nothing. And it will help, the average person better secure their access. So I get wanting to move the bar and sort of, force change, but I do not think that this is the intent behind it. I totally think that this is a money grab, a cost saving grab. And I'll actually liken it to Tesla's full self-driving. Everyone knows I love Tesla. I love my Tesla. I have two now. I'm a big fan of the vehicles and electric vehicles in general. But I will tell you right now, Tesla full service or full self-driving is kind of what they've put out there, is 100% not ready to be used in the real world. And that has been recalled. It's a software update, which is kind of an interesting way to have to do a recall, but it is not safe for most people to be using and is not the right way to do it. And I see this as the same type of approach where, they're basically trying to force a change before people are ready and despite the safety risks.
All right. So I want to verify a fact before I make my opinion. They're disabling SMS for non-paid subscribers, but you still can do MFA with a YubiKey or the Authenticator app.
Yes.
I don't have a problem with it. here's why: is that they're actually making the better option free, and the
Well, those are there
SMS.
already. You can do that today. That's not a new
Right.
option.
Well, that's free.
Yep.
They're taking away the lesser option, which, by the way, they have to pay. You could call it fraction of a penny to send SMS. It's a worse option from a security standpoint, and I think almost nobody's going to pay for this, right? No one's going to just
Nobody
say
is.
like, "All right, well, because it sounds like if you pay the $8.95 for the blue check, you get it. If you don't pay the $8.95, would you pay something just to have SMS rather than use the Authenticator app? I think the answer is no. And I think a lot of companies. So the problem that I think you have is that they're taking away this feature. If they never had the feature, it would be a non-story, right? Because I think there are services out there today that don't have SMS capability, right? It's Authenticator app or nothing. I mean,
But I think
I
if you
haven't worked for a
start,
company that allowed SMS for logging into the corporate network. Not
I
in a
think
long
that
time.
I guess the problem that I have with it is, what do you think the common person is going to do? Do you think they're going to go through the steps of saying, "Oh, I'm going to have to go and set up a Microsoft or Google or Authy Authenticator app automatically and just kind of do it"? I just don't see that happening. I think what's going to happen is the people who have SMS turned on today, they're going to all of a sudden not have it. And I'm sure there will be like email announcements and whatever maybe, right, that kind of go out. But I think the vast majority of the population is going to wake up one day and just not have SMS, not have any MFA on their account. And what do people do? They reuse passwords. And all of a sudden you're going to see this uptick in things. And then it will be, oh, well, should I do this? Go. Of course they should go and change to the Authenticator app. I just don't think the average person is going to proactively do that.
But I'm going to argue with your point about it being a money grab, because if it was a money grab, it would actually have to be something that people would pay for. And I don't think people are going to pay for this.
No, and I think it's a cost saving grab first, but in order to recoup it, they've started to, now you can become blue check certified or whatever, right, through a subscription, which is a whole other thing. This is not a move that is meant to improve security. This is a move to cut costs. And the way I see it, MFA is table stakes for any consumer facing service. Is you should build this into the product that you're delivering. You should have MFA options. Now, if you started without SMS, MFA, and there's plenty of companies, right, that do email magic links, things like that. And email isn't the best MFA option either. But I feel like if you start with one thing and then you pull it away later, I think that opens a lot more opportunity for things to happen in a negative aspect. I just don't think I don't have a problem with the actual switch. It's the way they're doing it. And just the fact that I don't think most people will go through the effort of setting up another new MFA. Most people already hate authentication as it is.
Yeah. When I first heard about the story, I only got it at the headline level, and I thought they were just taking away multi-factor authentication for everybody. And I was like, more leaning toward the negative. I was like, that's horrible. But I was also like, it's kind of an interesting experiment, because I wonder how many people will put a value on having their authentication more secured. Like, will thousands of people wind up paying $1 a month for SMS or for MFA? That would be really interesting data to have. I still wouldn't think it was a good idea at the level of, okay, if you have my account and you have my password, and there's just a greater chance of my account being breached or your et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I thought it would be an interesting experiment. Now that I understand that they actually are, basically saying, okay, we're going to monetize, or you have to pay for a lesser form of security than what we offer for free, I have absolutely no problem with it. I mean, I think it's on par with deprecating SMS as a form of MFA, which I think would be a great move.
I'm in favor of getting rid of it. I just don't think this is the right way to do it. I don't see Twitter as like the the
The
altruistic
bastion of security.
agents of hope and of do the right thing with all the other issues that they've been having recently. But I just don't think this is the right way to do it.
It's interesting. So I listened to a podcast called Lenny's Podcast, and I'm not going to remember which episode it was. It's one of the top podcasts in the world. Like, remember you had that
Like
that
us.
that website that kind of said, "All right, here's where podcasts rank," and Identity Center was one of the few IAM podcasts that was in the top 5%. I think there was one other one that I saw, which was Vittorio's. Anyway, there were other podcasts that I listened to that were in like the top 1%, like I listened to one called The Bronx Pinstripes, which is about the Yankees. And
Of
then
course you do.
Lenny's podcast, which was like in the top 0.1% of all podcasts. And I mean, this guy does like a really good podcast and it's focused on like product managers, mostly from tech companies. So like the product manager from Uber or the product manager from Notion or something like that. So he had a guy who was either a current product manager or a past product manager. And he was talking about layoffs. And like, he's like, and I don't even know if it was at the point where Twitter had announced its layoffs, but other companies were announcing some layoffs. And he's like, whether you like it or not, it's going to improve the company's bottom line. They're going to be a more successful company because they do these layoffs. And that might hurt to hear, but he's looking at it from the standpoint of he was involved with like layoffs at a lot of different companies and had done research on it. And it's like, you know, that's usually what happens with companies is that they have better numbers after they go through these layoffs.
Oh yeah, you're cutting costs. Right? I
Cutting
get
costs.
that, right? That's the business side of it. If you're looking to cut costs, I don't know if security is the way that I would do it.
Yeah.
The security of your user, especially when your product is your users, right? You're trying to sell advertising. Now, what happens when you've got
that's
a whole
the
bunch
thing.
of accounts that become compromised?
That was my point on like, or I don't know if it's the point that I raised at all yet, but I think they're trying to take Twitter and move away from the advertiser-based model.
Well, they're trying to diversify for sure. I mean, I think any company doesn't want to be 100% dependent on any one revenue stream, right? Everybody does that. So yes, they were very heavy on advertising. They've tried to dabble with subscription in the past. I get that, right? You want to monetize essentially your most engaged users, right? Twitter Blue or whatever they're calling it for the subscription side of things is not going to be something that 80% of their of their users use. It'll probably be more like 1%, 5%, something like that. The whales, right? It's very similar to mobile gaming, free to play gaming, things like that. You're not targeting, you're building a mechanism to target the whales, the ones who will spend $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 on a game, not the ones that will never spend a dime on it. It's the same thing on a subscription service. There's a lot of free trials out there that are limited, and that might be good enough, for 80%. The 20% is where you're going to make your money. And I think diversifying where you have a subscription revenue, you've got ad revenue, totally makes sense. Of course, there's other features being part of Twitter Blue, right? Longer posts, you can edit posts or delete posts, right? Stuff like that. I just don't feel like the security aspect of it is where you go to make the costs or make the to cut costs.
Right, but I think he's improving the security. So if he wasn't improving the security, then I would agree.
How is he improving security though?
Because the MF, they're pushing people who still want to, I bet you there's like a large percentage of Twitter users that are just username and password, no SMS. So do I think more people are going to go from SMS to username and password, or more people go from SMS to Authenticator app? I think it's going to be more people move to Authenticator app.
See, I think the opposite. I think a lot of people just won't do anything at all until they're forced to change. I don't think turning off a security feature is the way to force the change. I think you do it with a rollout and an incentive program and communication and tons of lead time to get people, and you nag them through email or whatever it may be. I don't think pulling it out in a month, 2 weeks, or whatever the time frame is is the right way when you're talking about a service that has, I don't know how many millions or billions of users on it. I just feel like of the percentages, I think a very small percentage will do it in the first, let's call it month even, right? Maybe they only log in once a month to check it. In the meantime, you're going to have a whole bunch of accounts that are going to be totally susceptible to, password spray attacks, whatever it may be. And then they're going to get compromised. And then those people aren't going to be able to actually set up their MFA. They're going to set it up, whoever's cracked their account, right? Either sell it or do stupid things with it or whatever it may be.
By the way, the reason I brought up the layoffs was actually a side topic because I think that
you felt we were getting too positive.
no, no, yeah, that's me. No, because I think that when Elon bought the company, he went out and laid people off, and it became a very public thing. It's almost like the way it was handled was very like, just not very nice. And
yeah.
There was that, and then he became a very active voice on social issues and got into very political topics. And so then there was, we have to get off, for a lot of people, we have to get off of Twitter. What's this Mastodon thing? And then, like, for me, I was like, what is Elon doing? He just spent $40 billion on this company, and now, it seems like what he's trying to do is, like, drive it into non-existence. I don't think that was his goal, because now he doesn't do those things, right? There's the layoffs that kind of happened. It's been in the past. He's not going out there and making these statements as much. And look, the news cycles are just so fast these days that it's like people have gone up to Mastodon, I think, and it's like it's not as good. Like there's not the base of people there. So it's kind of like, okay, well, everybody's back to Twitter.
Well, it's where the users are. And I think, there was certainly a spike where people moved over to Mastodon towards like the end of next year, but that has certainly trailed off. It has slowed significantly. I think any competing social network where Twitter users were fleeing to, that's been sort of like the trend is we don't like where things are going. Let's go find something new. They go there and then they sort of trail off, right? The growth doesn't keep up with that spike in demand. I created a Mastodon account for us over the Christmas break here over 2022, and it's fine. My problems with it aren't necessarily the functionality. I think it's actually better functionality than what Twitter has today. There aren't character length limits, so I can put as much things as I want there. My problems with Mastodon are two things. One, there's not as many users there, so people don't have as many accounts. So the reach isn't what it is on the Twitter side, but that makes sense, right? They're relatively new compared to where Twitter's been. And second is this idea of the federated identity servers and things like that. Finding people is a challenge because, I say this at the end of the podcast we did recently. It's like we're at IDAC podcast at infosec.exchange. There very well could be another at IDAC podcast at some other server. How do you know which is the real one? And that's the challenge that I have with it is, that identity validation or verification that takes place. I still think still needs to be worked out. I'm not going to go off and create IDAC podcast at every single Mastodon server because literally anybody can start one. Like it just doesn't make sense. So how do you make sure that you're following the right account? And that's the challenge I have with Mastodon.
Yeah, sounds confusing.
Yeah, but I like the product. Product's fine. I mean, it works. It's functional, right? I can put my videos and put my show announcements and things like that on there. I don't have to figure out how to fit it within a certain character limit that that Twitter has.
Yeah, I never liked the character limit.
Yeah, well, if you want to, you can become a subscriber and you can post long form and you can pay Twitter X dollars a month and you can do it.
Yeah, I haven't been on Twitter in years. I mean, I accidentally click a link every once in a while. I'm like,
so you're not really a big social media person. I think LinkedIn is probably your primary one, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. And that's the same thing for me. I mean, the only time I go on social media really is for the podcast type stuff, or if there's something maybe like work related, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. And you and I think we get the vast majority of our engagement comes on LinkedIn anyway. And that's why I try to keep LinkedIn clean from a content perspective. It's like here's a post about identity and access management or something related, hopefully, or the podcast, right? That kind of thing.
Right. Definitely true. So what else?
So it sounds like
planned for this episode.
What's that?
What else do we have planned for this episode?
Yeah, we're gonna let's work through a couple different clips here. Let's see. Let's start with number 91, Eric Anderson.
Okay,
Do you
so
want to preview
you're
this?
not going to play the clip from episode 1, huh?
No, I'm not gonna. It's
Okay.
It just makes my ears cringe. If people want to listen to it, we're not taking it down. It's still out there, right? It's a time capsule, as we've said all along, right? Episode 1, the content I think is good. Do I think it's our best episode ever? No, because it was our first episode and we had no idea what we were doing. I certainly didn't know what I was doing from an editing. My voice is very echoey.
Is it still the most listened to episode?
It's number 2.
Number 2.
And I think that's the great thing about this podcast is you don't have to like start from the beginning. A lot of people will start. They either start with 101, which is Sarah Cicchetti, when we talked about AWS, Cognito, and ID Pro, or they start with 1. And I wonder if at some point as we go in the future, if 201 or 200 will be one that people start with. They don't go all the way back in time. They maybe pick kind of a spot. But all of our episodes are, individual topics, self-contained. It's not like you need to be listening to episode 1. We're not a serial where you have to like know the backstory. We're talking about identity. We're not surprising anybody.
So you could just go backwards. Start at the top and work your way backwards.
Yeah, good. Yeah, please do. Please listen to all of them. That's great. Do you want to start? Let's start with Eric Anderson. I think he's one of your and I's favorite guests we've had on. We've met him a couple times now at a couple different conferences. Do you want to preview episode 91 or you want me to just play the clip?
Let's just play the clip and let's talk about it. I mean, other than the fact that Eric is the CISO at Adobe.
Okay, so here it is.
So for us, our Zero Trust program, we dubbed it ZEN at the beginning as an acronym for Zero Trust Enterprise Network. We started looking at Zero Trust about 3 years ago now. Google was starting to advertise and talk a lot about their program. We had met with some of our other peer companies about what they were looking at in the field. We were very excited about the idea and how we could do it. And at the time, there wasn't a single vendor solution to do it. So we started looking at trying to figure out what are the base pieces you needed to make Zero Trust work? How could we leverage our existing investments? And what were the little pieces we needed? So we took that to heart and started working with our existing vendors that we were working with and figuring out how could we start stitching stuff together. And the mantra was deliver something quickly using existing technology and minimize our investment. And so it really caused us to be super creative, reach out and extend and use the partnerships we had across the industry. And we wound up in mid-summer 2018 launching our first kind of version of Zero Trust. And one of the mantras that we had with it was we wanted an easier and a better user experience while increasing security, which I think is a lot of the mantra of what Zero Trust delivers. It's one of the few chances you get to actually make things more secure with making user experience better. And so we've been piloting it and playing around with it. And then we acquired a couple companies that summer, and they had some employees or locations that we weren't too enthusiastic about linking up the networks and the data centers together. So we decided it was a perfect pilot to see, could we at scale deploy Zero Trust? And normally when you onboard a new employee from an acquisition, you would go in and do a touch and connect them through VPN and onto the networks. And in this case, we decided, let's deploy our certificates. Our Zero Trust is based on certificate authentication and device scores on that front, and get them access to what they needed without needing VPN. And it was super successful. It allowed us to go from about 50 users to 1,000 users in less than a month. And then it took off from there.
So that was Eric talking about his Zero Trust journey. And I think still one of the few organizations, at least that I've talked to, that actually was ahead of the curve on it. And it's actually doing it pretty well in real life. What do you think?
I think if we were playing the Zero Trust drinking game, we'd be in big trouble now. But no, I mean, Eric's just such a bright guy. And I think he typifies CISOs in that bright guy with a lot of industry experience who's now dedicating all of his work life to the betterment of his company. And a couple things I took away from there was, he wants to, leverage a lot of the existing technology that his company's already invested in. I think that's a big factor that we take into account when we do um, strategy advisory. Is like, okay, well, what do you have in place today? What's reusable? What's the stuff that you want to throw away because you're not getting value out of it, or maybe the relationship's gone sour. And I think what I heard come through in his talk there was that there are certain technologies that we could leverage and get more out of, and there's certain relationships. And when I hear the relationship piece, it's like I've had good experience with these people, and I know I feel like I can count on them to go that extra mile for me, and I'm confident that they're going to work in my best interest. Jeff, you and I have always talked about, how do you deliver a vendor agnostic advisory? Develop a company strategy when your company sells services and specializes in certain technologies, right? How do you keep it? How do you keep it real? And I've always said, well, you put yourself in the shoes of the client and you say, what would I do if I were you? And if you work from that and that's truly your direction, then you don't have a problem being vendor agnostic. So um, I kind of feel like, some of those themes are coming through in what Eric had to say.
Yeah, I feel like replacing technology is typically the nuclear option. So let's figure out how we can work with what we have. Now, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I think the default position is you want to try and be economical, right, with resources is where you can. And if you've got a tool that, maybe it's not working today, but you think can work, let's go with it, right? Rip and replace is just is a whole other beast.
It's expensive.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like, a lot of times if you have a lot of investments and you never get them rolled out, you wind up with that idea of shelfware where you're paying for an investment that you're not getting any value out of, or maybe minimal value. If all you ever do is that MVP implementation, you never go beyond that. It's like you bought into this big dream and you're getting very little value out of it. So I think it makes sense that every couple of years or something, you're looking at those types of investments as well and saying either, look, this is part of our big vision, we're going to invest and get the most out of this software, or we're going to unroll the investment that we made and cut ties with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies that have the, literally the best products in the world, right? We're talking the upper rights, the rights for all the different Gartner, and KuppingerCole and Forrester analyst reports, right? All that stuff where they're like considered like the best. There's a lot of companies that have the best products and still struggle with it, and they don't get the value out of it because they just get to that MVP process and they kind of peter out from there, right? They don't keep things fed. They're not keeping things updated. And conversely, there's a lot of products out there that don't keep up with the market as well, right? I think, legacy products that have been out there for a while, the newer SaaS-based, young upstarts that are in the identity space came and took a lot of people's lunch, specifically like the IGA space. That is always at a risk to happen, right? What's next? Is it cloud infrastructure entitlement management? Is it ITDR, identity threat detection and response? Is it AI? I mean, there's a bunch of new stuff that's coming along, and not only do you as an organization, implementing these services need to keep up, the vendors that you're working with and the products you're using, those need to keep up as well.
That's right.
All right, let's get to the next one. Because speaking of CIEM, Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management, we had John Morton from Britiv on board for episode 115. Let me play that clip now.
So least privilege is a great idea, but here's my beef with least privilege. It is very human-centric. What's the other difference that I talk about a lot with the cloud? We want to move fast at the speed of service identity, at the speed of machines. When you are trying to analyze least privilege from some sort of visibility, and you have potentially hundreds of thousands of environments, roles, privileges, policies, inline policies, it is a losing battle. Why not go to a method of zero standing privileges? That meaning, if you have to have a user account, you have no privileges until you actually need them. When you need them, you can check them out. You can use them for as long as you want, and you give them back. Anybody who's ever been in the military, it's a very similar idea. I used to work on a nuclear submarine. We had roving watches on top, and we had service duty guns. We didn't say, hey, roving watch, you have duty in 8 days. Let me go ahead and give you this gun. I'm not going to give you bullets, but you just have the gun because it's part of your role. Go ahead and keep it. We had a method of when you needed the gun, you checked it out, you got the bullets you needed, you stood your watch, you checked the gun back in. We need to move fast. So to me, least privilege is that idea of let's try to get to some sort of RBAC. And that's where I do have beef, because in the cloud, as I just completely mentioned, sometimes you don't even need user accounts. I can give you a user account on demand when you need it with the access it needs and then take it away. That reduces risk. I would love to hear someone argue the other side of that. I want to hear just someone argue against zero standing privileges.
Well, he's not going to get that argument from me because I love the idea of zero standing privileges. The idea of the fact that nobody has access or has only the most basic things they need, right? Cafeteria menu, some internal SharePoint or internet site, something like that. But I love the idea of zero standing privileges. I think it is a nice goal to get to. How realistic it is for organizations, I think that it requires a lot of technology and automation and maturity in their structure to be able to actually make that a real thing in the real world. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so the reason I think we picked John's clip, a couple reasons. One, I think it's a really good clip, but the other is just trying to show kind of like the podcast we've had, CISOs, we've had folks like John who are like deep technology, like in his area, deep technology wizards. And we've had people on across the spectrum of, IAM domains who are like John. And we'll talk through like the Identirati. We'll talk through some of the clips for like CEOs of these up and coming technologies as well. So that's kind of like, the spectrum of folks that we get on the podcast. But specific to the domain topic that John brought up, I think that, for some organizations, getting to least privilege and an RBAC model would be a huge improvement over where they are at the moment. The zero standing privileges, I think, makes a ton of sense as well. And I think this is the point that you're making, is like, if you have the level of maturity to go to that. I think almost everyone now understands least privilege and role-based access control, which makes it easier to strive for, and fewer people understand the zero standing privileges, even though I think that is directionally the right way from a security standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. All right. This next one, I think, is one of our favorite episodes for sure. It's episode 151. What's the difference between digital identity and identity and access management? We had a lot of different answers. This is one where we crowdsourced a lot of different thoughts from some of the Identirati that are out there. And I think this clip is me kind of setting the stage to that. So let me play that here real quick.
Has the definition of identity and access management changed? Because I feel like it kind of has. And there's a lot of different terms sometimes used for this, right? Digital identity, IAM, IDM, all the different sort of identity words that could be out there. I thought, I was like, okay, it'll be interesting to get, some of the Identirati, as we like to say, on the show in some way and kind of have a roundtable discussion. And then actually you had the brilliant idea. It was like, why don't we just ask people the question and have them, email in their audio response. So I guess, Jim, do you want to kind of take us through the process of how we got to where we are today, and from your perspective?
I think what happened was Andy kept saying digital identity. And I thought to myself, whatever happened to IAM? And so I asked him that question. What's the difference between digital identity and IAM? And it kind of stumped him, right? And he's like, well, this is a longer answer. Or this would be a longer answer than we have time for in this little bit of the episode. So maybe we make it a follow-up episode, and then from there we kind of, as you mentioned, evolve the idea into this kind of roundtable, and we're going to go through the recordings that were submitted.
But yeah, the way this worked was, Jim spammed everybody that we could think of, sending email to say, hey, here's the question, if you'd be willing to record like a 2 to 3 minute sort of answer on what your thoughts are. And the question that we posed to everyone was this: what's the difference between digital identity and identity and access management? We're really kind of looking to see, what the different responses were. We got responses from a few different people. We have Ian Glazer. He's the Senior Vice President, Identity Product Management at Salesforce. He's a friend of the show, been on the show before. Sarah Sacchetti, she's the head of product for Amazon Cognito, another person who's been on the show. Actually, all these people have been on the show. Eve Mailer, Chief Technology Officer at FordRock. We've got Adam Michael, who's a Data Management Officer and Director for IT Risk and Identity, and Adjunct Professor at Texas A&M University. And then our old friend, Jamie Lewis-Gross, who's the Vice President, Solutions Engineering and Strategy at Savient.
So we got a lot of good answers. We put that question out there. And we've talked about this a few times with a few different guests. And I think, the Andy Hindle, I think this is a question you had asked in a previous episode, like right before. And then we got, responses from everybody. And I think what struck me was how different everyone's answers were. And for the most part, still kind of generally aligned, with the exception of Adam, who had a totally different take on it. And he kind of flipped it on its head a little bit. And I wonder still to this day if that is because he's not a identity product or service person. He is in the real world, as I'll call it, right?
Yeah,
What do you think?
He's a true practitioner, right? So, by the way, I've been in touch with Adam. He's offered to come back on the show to talk about DevSecOps and IAM's role in DevSecOps. So that's going to happen. Yeah, that's going to happen this year. That's going to be a fantastic one. He did have a different perspective, but it's like as we were playing those clips, my opinion kept changing. We recorded with Eve the other day, and I was listening to her answer, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I agree with Eve on this one, right?" So her perspective was like digital identity is this thing, and identity access management is the management of that thing. And I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. But I think also kind of going back to Fridentity's definition, which is like it's a football. So like how you use the term digital identity is like, is it the physical ball or is it this concept of a game, this global game called football? So I thought that was really good because I think we use the terms interchangeably, which doesn't mean that that's right to do, but I think the definition of a word does change over time based on how the term is used.
Yeah, context matters. That's the way I kind of think of it. It's like it's a blob. It's a piece of Play-Doh or a Lego set, and you can make it kind of look whatever you're trying to do, and it matters who you're talking to and all that good stuff.
The last thing I'll say about that episode, though, is like if somebody asked me like, hey, I want to listen to one episode of your podcast, which one would you recommend? That's the one, 151.
Yeah, that's a good one to kind of really get a good distillation of all the different things that kind of go on in our space. Let's go ahead and move on to episode number 166. This is something that we actually recorded with Head Kovetz from Silverfort while we were at Gartner up in the RSM suite, the sweet suite, as you kept referring to it all that week. Let me go ahead and play that now.
For a long time, identity security was kind of mixed into just IAM, identity infrastructure. If you have an IAM platform, it has some security features, obviously. But I think we got to a point where, because there are so many attacks that are leveraging stolen identities and credentials, people are realizing that we need to look at identity security as a standalone thing that we have to solve. And it kind of can't be a feature in the identity platform because most companies have a few different identity platforms. They have Active Directory on-prem, and they have Azure AD or Okta in the cloud, and they have something for their privileged access management, and they have something in the perimeter. And all of these are from different vendors that are competing with each other. So there has to be a standalone category or solution that would look at identity threats across all these things and really focus on securing the identities, securing this attack surface that people, I think, for a long time didn't really think about as a major attack surface, but it is, one of the biggest. We see that with every ransomware attack, right, where it just spreads in the network so easily, no matter what kind of security tools you have, simply because you can take a stolen account from Active Directory and use it to move to any other computer in the network. Nobody will stop you. So ITDR is really about detecting and stopping these identity threats and looking at identity as an attack surface.
What do you think?
I remember reaching out to Head Kovacs to get him onto the podcast and just thinking, okay, here's a normal guy who started this company. Can't wait to, kind of hear what his opinions were. We got him recording. I was like, oh my God, this guy's like a genius. Like he actually is really plugged in. So again, a great episode to go and listen to. Head is, part of this like group of CEOs and founders coming out of Israel, who, I mean, they're creating the next generation of IAM products, I think, realistically. But specific to ITDR, I kind of feel like, the traditional IT security umbrella has kind of looked at things from an IP address standpoint. So if things are happening on the network from certain IP addresses, like we would pick up signals based on IP, this next generation of tools like identity threat detection response is really taking a lot of those same concepts and basing them on identity, because now it's like you can take not only the network level, but you can also take the identity level and look for things that are happening from an identity or somebody who's trying to maybe use an identity footprint and use it over multiple devices to attack the network. So to me, it's kind of an evolution, but an important evolution, because I think usually the way that breaches occur is by people getting hold of some credentials and trying to leverage those credentials, and they're going to use them in ways that would be unnatural for a user to use them. So those are important signals, because one of the things that, I think the catchphrase that maybe I'm the only one who's been saying it, but at least in my mind, IAM always used to be who has access to what. But I feel like that definition should be who has access to what and what are they doing with it. Because it's like, what are they doing with it is the signal that says, hey, maybe it's not even the human being that is supposed to, that maybe that it's a different human being using those credentials that tie back to the identity.
Yeah, I feel like it's sort of an evolution of what UBA, user behavior analysis, and UEBA, user entitlement and behavior, entity behavior analysis, were trying to do maybe like 10 years ago. And I feel like the ITDR, identity threat detection response, is sort of the natural evolution of that. Now, to get it right, you have to have data, and you have to have baselines, and you have to have, the things to be able to correlate what looks fishy versus not fishy. But to me, it's just it's an evolution of where that's going. And I think it's where things are headed. I mean, I think this is, I think we've got a lot of organizations that have spent the money on getting identity tools into place. What's the next step? Well, how do you get more value out of it? Let's take the data that's sitting in there in these privileged access management, identity governance, your single sign-on, your authentication platform, and try to tie that all together to do things with that data, which totally makes sense. All right, let's move to the next one here. This is episode 196, so relatively recent. We talked with Mickey Budai from Transmit, and here's that clip.
We're seeing things that are more geared toward bypassing two-factor authentication. This is funny, when two-factor authentication is kind of like, recent in terms of the adoption rate of two-factor authentication, even though it's been with us for many, many years. Only, probably in the last 5 years or so, we're starting to see organizations really adopting two-factor authentication, and typically with an OTP, typically over, SMS or email or, a specific application to do that. As soon as, fraudsters realized that this is what organizations are doing, they immediately came up with man-in-the-middle attacks, it's not like they invented it, right? Like these attack vectors, I can tell you that, we've been experimenting with them like 20 years ago. So everything was known, but like, sometimes like the motion is, it's like always like, for me, it's like you're watching something in slow motion, right? It's like when you're watching something in slow motion, you know what's going to come next because you get like a lot of time to think. So with, for example, with two-factor authentication, it was pretty obvious that as soon as everyone is, starts to adopt it, fraudsters will be able to bypass it very easily. So we're seeing a lot kind of like man in the middle phishing websites where like, the phishing website asks you for the OTP code, and then the fraudster goes and completes that. And a slightly more advanced attack would be a SIM swap, which is becoming easier to do now with eSIM, and the fact that you don't need like a physical SIM to pretend to be, to take over a different phone number. The actual mobile operators are being a part or, a step in the attack itself. So we're seeing a lot of that typically.
So moving towards passwordless, which has been a theme, I think, for getting things and stronger authentication. Hey, maybe Twitter's going to surprise me and they're going to replace SMS with passwordless for all their users. I'm sure that will be a cheaper solution.
Might not be cheaper, but I think, that conversation we had with Mickey was just so insightful. So, he's been in the space for so long, started a very successful organization, and, he kind of like went into the space looking at orchestration, and now they've really moved to authentication and putting risk at the center of kind of how they do authentication. And kind of one of the conversations that has been real interesting to me lately is the shared responsibility around letting people in the door. So it's partially your everybody these days is like outsourcing the technology to do authentication to another company, but that does not absolve you from the need to or from the risk involved with those authentications and setting the settings and things like that. So to me, it's like this issue of risk and levels of assurance is like it was the center of this discussion 10, 15 years ago. It's the center of this discussion today. I think the authentication technology that's out there today is much better, but it doesn't remove all the risk from an organization or from a practitioner perspective to handling the authentications. It just gives you a better set of tools.
Yeah, well said. I don't think I can top that. So, and where do we go from here before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, the next time we have an episode where we really recognize that we've hit a milestone, what is that number? Is it 300, 500? I mean, we're basically doing about, roughly 50 to 60 episodes a year. So to get to episode 1000, it's going to be like 15 more years. So I think, 500 is a major milestone, but I think we ought to, at least recognize things. I think what we want to continue to do is like, let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep it vendor agnostic. I mean, you and I have like, we went over 5 episodes, and of those 5 episodes, 4 people came from, either, well, no, I'm sorry, three of the episodes, people came from technology vendors. And one of the things that we've been big on is saying this podcast is not an infomercial. Not an infomercial for you, it's not an infomercial for us. Doesn't mean we're not grateful and make sure that we say thank you when people do things to support the cause. That does not mean it's like an official endorsement of any technology or service or of ourselves. So that's where I'd like to see us keep on that track of not being an infomercial, this being kind of, to steal your term, a safe place. That people can come and get real information, hear real voices and perspectives in the industry, and know that they're not just going to be pitched to for an hour, because who would be interested in listening to that anyway?
Not me, and I'm not planning on editing it either. So good luck with that. No, I think you're totally right. We'll keep it vendor neutral, keep it casual, conversational, not a presentation. I will counter. I absolutely 100% endorse you and I. How about that?
All right.
And of course, we'll continue to bring on guests and folks that can add value to the conversation beyond just a marketing pitch or things like that. That doesn't interest me. I don't think it interests a lot of people that are out there. I think we just want to get to the meat of the topic and go from there.
Yeah, and
we'll see.
realistically, we've done it now for 3.5 years. I think there's only one time in all of that time in all 200 episodes where we had to call a timeout and say, look, this is getting a little bit too much on the advertising side, so let's dial it back, right? Everybody agrees. I mean, if you listen to that episode from Mickey that we just played, he's the co-founder of Transmit Security, but he didn't pump his product or talk about yeah, this is why we're the best. Not one single time. We asked him to come on to talk about risk and authentication, and it's that's what we got, and that's what we expect out of all of our guests.
Yeah, safe place. All right, we've been going on for about an hour and 10 minutes so far, roughly.
Lengthening people's walks.
We're gonna keep things. We'll keep things rolling here for another. We'll celebrate another 100 episodes, number 300, and they're all my children and all my babies, so I want to make sure that they come out well. Before we wrap up, any new TV shows that you're into?
Yeah, so I have Paramount Plus. Yeah, documentaries. I watched a bunch of documentaries last night. Yeah. I've got Paramount Plus. I'm very into the Yellowstone spinoffs, but I'm all caught up on those. And then Picard. That's my one sci-fi that I really watch because it brings me back to my Star Trek The Next Generation days. And it looks like season 3 is heavy on, old. It's got Riker. It's got Beverly, who is the medic on the Enterprise. And I've heard Geordie LaForge mentioned several times who that was one of my favorite characters on that old show. How about you?
I slept on Picard for a while, and you kept mentioning. I was like, "Yeah, I'll get around to it." And frankly, I would just forget that Paramount Plus existed. And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I'll finally check it out." And it's good. I really enjoyed it, so I'm looking forward to that. I have finished Hacks on HBO, which is a comedy drama type series. It's got Gene Smart. It's got Hannah Einbinder, and I think it's really funny and really well done. I think it's been nominated for a bunch of different things, but that's another one that I kind of slept on for a little while. And then I think there's 2 seasons of it now, and I've kind of worked my way through that, and I'm really enjoying that. So that's definitely one to check out if you haven't kind of seen it. And then I've actually started watching House of the Dragon, the Game of Thrones spinoff. I watched the first episode when it first came out. I was like, okay, kind of left it alone. And then I've been watching the last few episodes over the last few nights, trying to get caught up on it. And it's okay. I won't say it's as good as Game of Thrones yet, but I think it's one of those things where you kind of have to build up into it to some degree with the world building and characters.
Yeah, for me, Game of Thrones, the best seasons were the first couple of seasons. It's just what's that show where The Walking Dead? The first few seasons, I can actually see that happening. Then as these shows get further in, they become more like a Stephen King movie where it's in the beginning you're yeah, that's real life, that could really happen, and then all of a sudden it goes off the rails, and so that's where I usually lose interest. But I'm a big fan of Picard, which is 500 years in the future, and who knows if humanity will even continue. There's me bringing it down right before we end the episode.
Yeah, well, hopefully someone will. I'll be able to digitize myself somehow and make myself an AI that can kind of live forever somewhere.
That'd be great.
In some sort of low fidelity mode, taking all the audio that has been part of this podcast, the 2,000 hours plus that we have out there, and sort of cobbled together an AI around that.
Well, there's I was watching one of my documentaries, and there's this certain type of frog that I forget where he lives, but when it freezes, he gets frozen in the ice, and when the ice thaws, he comes back to life. And that's the reason that they can't freeze humans is because the freezing process destroys our cells. but there's something with this frog where his cells don't get destroyed by the cold. So if they could figure out that science,
well, that's the cryogenic, I think, right? Freeze your body or freeze your head for the future. Some
and then maybe we'll have it figured out.
And then we get into, if you haven't seen the show Altered Carbon on Netflix, basically you're getting downloaded into a new body every time you die, which is kind of an interesting concept too.
That would be interesting.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and leave it there. That was episode number 200. Jim, always a pleasure when it's just you and I chatting. I feel like it's so easy. I have so few edits that I have to make, which is great.
And the prep is very little.
We prepped. This is one that I wasn't sure what we were going to do, and we again kind of pulled it out together. What are we going to talk about? Here we are, hour 15 later.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Maybe
it'll be a short episode.
Yeah. All right, we're going to go ahead and leave it there. We're on the web, idacpodcast.com, Twitter at IDAC Podcast, Mastodon at IDAC Podcast, at infosec.exchange. Jim and I are always happy to connect with LinkedIn. If you're a listener, please drop a comment or something so they know that you listen to the show. And be sure to subscribe so you know when new episodes come out. And I've got one more surprise for you, Jim. You ready for it?
Yeah.
We've got a new outro, not just a new intro, but a new outro.
Oh, I can't wait.
Here it goes.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com and find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. See you next time on Identity at the Center.